I think personally that architecture is really about talking to people and joining together in projects. We always believe that architecture is about improving people's lives, and I think that's only possible when you really have contact with them and you can really understand their needs. So that's why I think meeting in person is very essential. Level of architecture is basically about how we can try to improve the quality of architecture and how we can try to retrieve a bit of the, let's say, power of the architect in the process of actually making buildings. I must say that it's kind of strange to see yourself on a documentary before you have to give a lecture. In general, I think everybody thinks it's strange to hear themselves talk anyway on film, so I have exactly the same experience. So tonight I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the projects I've been doing, but also to talk about the different companies that I run. I run Powerhouse Company, which I founded almost 16 years ago. And we employ now around 100 architects. We work from Rotterdam, Oslo, Munich and Beijing. But 5 years ago, almost 6 years ago, I also founded another company called Red Company, which is basically a real estate development company. I'll also talk a little bit about that. And actually 6 months ago, I also founded another company which is called Construction Company, which is basically a contractor, and also talk a little bit about that. But I'll start with let's say more or less the beginning, and in almost every lecture I always start with this project. It was our first project we ever did. You also saw it in the documentary. I really like the Italian name called Villa Prima, which sounds really good. It's Villa 1. It was the first villa we designed. It was also one of our first clients when we started 15 years ago. And the client really wanted quite something peculiar. He bought this piece of land, a big plot of forest, but he was not allowed to build a lot on that plot. He was allowed to build 250 square meters. It was a very large plot, and only 3 meters high. So, and he wanted actually around 500 square meters. So what we did, we came up with a strategy where we said, okay, we will design the house on the ground floor using all the rooms that need daylight, and then we orient every room ideally towards the sunlight, and in the basement we will put all the other rooms. So what we then designed is basically the diagram you see here. We put the living room on the southwest, we put the study on the north, and we put the kitchen on the let's say the east, southeast. So all day long the kitchen would have sun, the living room in the afternoon, and the study would be basically on the north. And it created this quite particular plan, a really open plan also with maximum views to the forest. And also there's really distinct quality in the plan, basically almost like 3 wings of the Farnsworth house kind of colliding together into one shape. And then in the basement we positioned the bedrooms and the garage. And you could say the basement is actually all about rooms. So they're almost like Roman rooms, like really clearly defined spaces. Where actually the ground floor is actually one big open flowing space where actually the space is made by furniture elements that are designed as quite particular pieces of the architecture. And this was basically our first project, and I was working more or less alone on this project. My wife actually also worked on the project with me. She helped me complete the building application, for instance. We worked a lot on the detailing together. And everything was meticulously drawn, everything was actually detailed according to our specifications. And after a few years of work, we won a lot of prizes with this house. And also it was actually the only project that we ever managed to finish within time and within budget, more or less, to be really very honest with you. But it was really a great pleasure to work, and it was a really good start to actually start with the architecture that is very much from the desire of the client. We worked really closely with the client, also really closely with the site, with the forest, and of course also really closely with our references to architecture, because obviously there's a lot of references to Mies and to Le Corbusier in this project, but also to Saarinen, project architects that we love, and we really combined all of these in this project. Now this was started in 2005 and finished in 2008, just before the financial crisis. And finishing that house actually led to the fact that a lot of people thought, okay, these guys from Powerhouse, they are basically villa designers. So they asked us to design more villas. We designed this one called Villa L, which was a lot larger than the one we designed. Villa 1 was 500 square meters. This was 1,500 square meters, 1,500, for a family, also in the forest. And here we designed basically 3 very distinct floor plans, very different floor plans from each other. The ground floor being really open towards the garden and really close towards the road, and having a kind of long strip of surfaces in the middle. And you can see on the plan that actually the south is on the left. You see a little pocket there that really shields basically from the wind. So you can sit there also in the winter. So this is the plan. You can see very clearly on the south, really open towards the garden and really close towards the street. So it's really based on the context. The basement is basically extremely pragmatic. And then the bedroom level was basically all about designing privacy for each of the bedrooms. So all of the rooms are basically designed like small kind of houses on a kind of communal plaza, and really created a kind of really quite bizarre structure in order to have these 3 different logics of the plan, which are totally separate from each other, to build it actually in a really pristine way. So the structure was all made in steel, again meticulously detailed. I'm trying to click for the next slide, but it's not responding somehow. Ah, yeah, there it is. Yeah, so here you can see the structure. Yeah, and again, it was really, let's say, all about detailing, trying to control engineering in the completest sense, trying to master all the materials that we use, trying to master every detail. You can see also the transparency on the garden side. And here you can see this little pocket in the living room. But it was also a strange time to actually build this house, because this house got built right in the middle of the financial crisis. It's not really responding properly. Trying to, ah yeah, there you go. Yeah, you can see the bathroom, the swimming pool. But then, yeah, what happened of course in 2008 is that we had a huge financial crisis. And what really struck me as an architect is that not only were, let's say, almost all the bankers fired, also immediately all the architects were fired. And for me, it was really made me think in 2008, like, how come that architecture has become so incredibly entwined with basically with finance? You know, how come these 2 worlds are so incredibly close to each other, even though in school, in architecture school, we never ever learn about financing, we never learn about the economy of architecture, and why is it that architecture is so responsible or so linked to economy. So what we did, we actually wrote 2 books about the relationship between architecture and economy. One was really about the architectural crisis, called Rien ne va plus, and the other one was called Shifts. We wrote that one together with Hans Ibelings. And we also made a couple of collages. This is a collage we made, well, based on a work by Damien Hirst and a work by Norman Foster about speculation in real estate. But we also made diagrams as models, you know, because of course we are architects, and it's really great to make scale models of economic phenomena. And this one is particularly relevant even today. What you see here is actually in the front you see the person is actually the rise of the average income in Europe. And as you can see, the average income is not really rising. It's rising actually very, very slowly. It's extremely consistent. And what you see in the background are the different housing prices in different countries. And what you can see is that in some countries the housing prices are rising very, very fast, a lot faster than actually the income is rising, which means that, as we have now in Holland, that the houses are making more money than the people that are living in them. And this is a very strange phenomenon, that you go to work every day and your house stays at home and they make more money than you do. It also means that the whole concept of houses, of course not private villas, but apartments are basically there for a large extent as a kind of extension of the economic sphere, of global, capitalism, you could say. Well, this is about trade balance and trade indifferences and trade deficits, sinking and rising. You can see the trade deficit of America and the trade surplus of China. It also explains, for instance, why China is continually booming in terms of real estate. And this one is also particularly interesting. We researched this quite a bit. This is about how many of the buildings that we actually have in the world are designed by architects. And there are a number of institutes and universities that research this. But the best guess at the moment is between 3 and 6% of the buildings in the world are designed by architects. And the rest is basically designed by contractors, engineers, basically people who build. And of course in Europe we're lucky that we are living in cities where actually architects still play a role. But in a very large part of the world this is not the case. And this is also to underline the fact that as architects we always think that we are, have a very important role, which of course we have, but it's also a very limited role because it's also limited by the fact that the economy also tends to go around architecture. Well, that in the background we were working on a lot of different things, but at the same time for us as an office still we kept on working on villas, and we thought the house of 1,500 square meters in Holland was a large house. We got a request for a house in Munich, which is over 2,000 square meters. A house in Munich. We also founded an office there. Munich is really a particular city in Germany. It has a really strong identity. It's actually quite close to Italy, being the south, and it has a lot of influence from Italian architecture. And the client really requested that the house would be modern, at the same time also kind of grounded within, let's say, Munich's culture. And also a house that would not be light as the Villa 1 project, but rather more dark. And I thought that was a fantastic starting point for a project. And so we researched quite a bit about Munich architecture and also about the innovations in Munich. I think Pinakothek, the old Pinakothek in Munich is also a very interesting example of this kind of cross point between modernity and traditionalism and classicism. And of course, the site being on the river, it had a facade towards the street where the client didn't want to make a big fence, and it had on the back it had a large plot on the river. So basically, what we did, we designed a house that is really quite close on the front, on the street. So you have a lot of privacy, and on the back it's very open. So basically, a house that on the beginning from the front is extremely closed and more vertical, and on the back is more horizontal. These are the different facades. And in the plan, you see the same. It's actually on the front a very formal house with a really symmetrical plan. Almost out of Loos-like plan, really you could almost say 1920s. And towards the back, it actually opens up and shifts itself towards the sun and the garden, and it becomes a museum. It becomes a more free space. So it shifts from a kind of Loosian plan, a round plan, towards the kind of plan libre, towards the kind of more museum plan. And these were the visuals we made for it. So really quite heavy and quite monumental facade in front. Then a really kind of quite light and horizontal facade on the back. This material palette, it was actually not done in ceramics but in natural stone. But actually it could have been done in ceramics as well. But natural stone with the brown marble with brass detailing. And this is the built result. So a really strong and quite heavy facade, extremely grounded. And also really careful detailing, the way it lands on the plinth and it connects to the garden. You can see all the detailing here in brass. Here you see the front. Actually, these shutters can also close, so the facade can actually be almost entirely closed on the front. And these two brass doors were all custom designed for the house. You can see the entrance. And then on the back, the house is really more horizontal and opening up towards the garden. And the interior was designed by Christian Liègre from Paris, and we worked really closely with Christian Liègre to create this kind of seamless experience from interior to exterior. And it's a house basically where the level of, let's say, construction and detailing and control basically over materials and atmospheres is really extremely high level. And we also designed the garden actually. Yeah, you can see also the way the brass, actually the brass railing is actually then detailed into the stone floor. So it was all really quite extraordinary in terms of control. And you can see the garage. And the garage also we designed basically like a big room, basically like a large entrance room for these gorgeous cars that were also curated, the cars, as part of the project. And you can see the stair, which in itself was a kind of amazing feat of engineering because it's the only stair in the house. It's a wooden stair and it's also a fireproof stair. And for this, for instance, we worked almost 1 year to get the approvals from the German government to make sure that we have all the tests in order to make this particular wooden stair like this. So, you know, that's the kind of level of detailing that we very much enjoy doing in our projects. At the same time, we were also working on public projects. We worked extremely hard to get our first public commission doing a technical school. Actually, the technical school I also went to myself when I studied in Amsterdam. And it was a really particular competition because the site is actually right here on this piece of grass. And what's interesting is that building on the left is a building that everybody really loves. It's a monumental building from the 30s. And the extension, the white extension you see over there, was done in the 60s. It was actually done by the architect that used to work for the architect that designed the building on the left. And the building on the left everybody loves, and the building on the right everybody hates. And we had to design a building right here. So what we did in the competition is that we said, okay, let's make a building that steps a bit back, so it creates a plaza in front. And then we put a slab over there, and then we combined the two buildings with a big atrium, and we actually connected, rather than creating a very small street in between this old building and the new building. That was quite daring for the school, because actually they wanted a separate building, and then we connected it. But in the end, we won the competition, and for us that was, of course, a fantastic moment. I was expecting then that as an architect you would be invited to also talk maybe to the dean of the school about maybe the kind of educational philosophy and about we would, you know, design the building. But the first talk we had was basically with the facility manager and with the financial manager of the school. And they were both part of the real estate division of the school. And we found out that basically the school has their own real estate platform, basically a small real estate company that is managing all the buildings of the school. And they were only managing it basically by spreadsheet and not so much by let's say, educational philosophy. And it really made me think, like, well, you would almost expect that, of course, if you work for a private client, that of course you have to deal with, let's say, or a developer, of course you have to deal with the market logic. But if you build for a school, you would expect that you wouldn't, you know, necessarily work according to the market logic. But in a way, I think, especially, you know, in Europe, Northwestern Europe, we have over the years really privatized a lot of our public sphere. And of course, you know, books like Capital by Thomas Piketty are really exactly about that, basically about the privatization of public space. Or the book by Nanne de Ru from OMA about the changing role of the architect, that you increasingly have to work within the commercial domain. And you see that also in the Netherlands, that over the last years there has been an incredible influx of capital into the Dutch market, basically wanting to buy real estate and using real estate as a means to invest. And that really made me think that as an architect, if you want to have control over architecture and you want to have control over what you make, it would actually be very interesting if you would learn how to be a developer rather than only working for developers and basically working for spreadsheet-oriented clients. Wouldn't it be good if you would learn how to do that yourself? And we also, of course, we see that it's happening everywhere in the world. In Toronto, this is Daniel Liebeskind in Toronto designing condos or apartment buildings for investors. But it's also happening in the museums. We see more and more private museums worldwide. Of course, not only Gary in Paris, but also, of course, the really gorgeous Prada Foundation in Milan by Ome. So basically, yeah, and well, here you see it. Well, there's many examples of private museums rising. So that really leads you to the question as an architect also, who are you really working for? Who is your client? Is your client then really ambitious? And how do you really control the quality of your product? And that's why I founded 6 years ago Red Company, a real estate development company, it means basically. And what we do is we develop real estate, keeping in mind that we always want to create better architecture. And I'll give you a few examples. One of the projects we did is, the first one is actually a really small project, a small office building. This one actually was empty for quite a while. Nobody wanted to have it. It's actually designed by a quite good architect from the 60s. It has amazing views, and what we did, we bought the building and we took those views to create really great apartments in it. And what we did also, we created small apartments, medium apartments, and large apartments. And the real estate broker that we used to sell the apartment said, yeah, this is not going to work. You should only make small apartments in it, and then, you know, because it's big apartments, you will never sell them. And the funny thing is that we sold actually all the apartments in 1 week. But the interesting is also is that we have small apartments and big apartments, which means that we have young people, for instance, that are only starting in the market, and we have in the big apartments maybe older people that are maybe a bit more wealthy, all living in the same building and, you know, communicating with each other and having a good time. I also use that actually to build a house for myself on top of it. You know, being the architect and also being the developer, we designed this house for ourselves on top of the roof, with amazing views over the skyline, and also load-bearing glass. So there's no columns, there's only glass, and the glass is really carrying the entire roof. Yeah, it's a fantastic place to live, and it shows, I think, what you can do if you control the whole process. Because I think if I would have designed this for a normal developer, I think it would have been less extreme. Probably the developer would have said, well, maybe you should only make small apartments, or maybe the project should be only about luxury apartments, or maybe you shouldn't design a house for yourself on top of the roof. Another example is the Bunker Tower in Eindhoven. This is also, I think, a pretty interesting example. This is a building designed by Maaskant, a quite famous Dutch architect from the 60s, a brutalist architect. And he designed this cultural center. This is the University of Eindhoven. Eindhoven is a really industrial city. And this, you can see the expansion of the city in the 60s. Here they have the big university, technical university, and here they built the cultural center called the Bunker. And it's called the Bunker because basically it looks like a bunker. And it was the cultural center of the university. It's entirely made in concrete, extremely nicely detailed. And it was for quite a while, it was also the best place for punk and alternative culture. Here it says the happy slaves are the worst enemy of freedom. You know, so this was really like the building was all about punk culture. But you know, actually 4 years ago, the university said this is not our core business anymore. It's not our core business to have this kind of cultural buildings. So we are selling it on the market, and they made a competition that any developer could buy it for the highest price. And actually, almost all the developers wanted to tear it down and then build apartments there. And what we came up with was a plan to actually have the highest bidding, but also find a way to entirely restore the building in its original shape. And we looked a lot at the work of Maaskant. Maaskant made really big buildings. He made really brutal buildings. And he also made buildings with a really quite distinct signature. Really this kind of really clear, strong modernist lines. Really a lot of horizontality in it. So what we did, we came up with a strategy where we used the kind of Janus face, Janus head strategy, where we said on the one hand we will create a tower that is actually rising out of the bunker, almost as if it's a kind of growing out of Maaskant himself, you know, as if Maaskant would have designed his own extension in a way. And at the same time, from the road, we will design a really clear distinction between the low rise of the bunker and in the back the tower. So that's how we designed it, and we designed the facade also to kind of almost start at the bottom as if it would have been an extension of Maaskant itself, and then towards the top it would get more and more horizontal, and also more and more, you could say, contemporary. So you see the volume, and that housing volume, that is about 230 apartments. They actually create enough revenue to create a huge park around it, and also to entirely renovate the bunker itself and to bring it back in its full glory. Here you see the bunker. These are all artist impressions from the park. And what we used in the facade, so the original bunker is made in concrete, and the facade we do it in marble, in a kind of granite marble, which really works extremely well together with the concrete of the bunker itself. You see the way the tower steps back. So it's entirely designed, let's say, in the kind of language of Maaskant, but then kind of brought into the 21st century. Here you see the park, designed by Steven Delva, a really brilliant landscape architect that we work with a lot. So we really invested to make this a really fantastic new part of the city, and then restoring the bunker itself into, again, a cultural function in the plinth of the building. So we can actually, almost like a kind of Robin Hood model, we can actually use the force of the development of the tower to create the effect of keeping the bunker itself as a cultural center. And of course also some apartments in the original part. You see an image of it. And it's actually now being built. It's going to be finished in about 1 year. And yeah, I'm really extremely excited about it, also about the use of materials. So we combine here the stone with the concrete and the wood. I think it will be a really nice combination of materials that in itself will become, I think, a whole nice unity. Another project we are developing and designing is a tower in Rotterdam on an extremely small piece of land, where a lot of developers didn't want to work because they thought it was too small. And we actually designed a tower with very large windows, so you can create these amazing views. But also because we can really engineer the project really well, it's possible to actually achieve this result. We also did some offices. We made this office building for ASICS, for instance. It's also a project that we developed and designed. And here we created a building that also has extremely high sustainability ratings, while at the same time still creating a lot of daylight and glass, and on every floor a big balcony. So we also thought a lot about the health and the work environment. So, you know, in a way, this kind of combination of Red Company and Powerhouse Company gives us the kind of strength to pursue some of the, let's say, architectural ambitions that we have by controlling basically this combination. I just want to talk about this project. You already saw it in the documentary, Floating Office Rotterdam. We actually built it as part of an ambition of Rotterdam to house the offices for the Global Center on Adaptation. This is a new institute founded by Ban Ki-moon, the Secretary General of the United Nations, to think about the consequences of climate change and how we can adapt. And the city of Rotterdam offered them office space, and we designed and developed for the city of Rotterdam an office building where we are based, but also the GCA is based. And we thought it would be extremely cool to pick up on the ambition of the municipality, which was, can you create a floating office? And we came up with the business case. We needed around about 3,000 square meters to make that happen. And we did it in the Eindhoven, one of the newly developing parts of the city of Rotterdam. And we used that project to actually really try to create the most sustainable office in the Netherlands, and also the most resilient office in the Netherlands. And we did that by using a concrete floating body. It's by far the most durable way to create a foundation, a floating foundation. We also use it as a huge heat exchanger. So the water really cools the concrete, and we use that to actually cool the building. And then on top of that, we built everything in a wood structure, a modular wood structure. So it's entirely built out of wood, entirely circular, and we use that same structure actually to create also, again, really large windows. Here you see the way it was built. It was actually built in 3 months. The whole wooden structure was built in 3 months. It was extremely fast because everything was prefabricated. And here we used a lot of our engineering knowledge we have in the office to create an extremely smooth building process. And in this case, as we were also the developers, we could also make some quite extreme choices. For instance, the windows you see in this building are 6 by 3 meters. You might remember the big windows I have in my house. They're also 6 by 3 meters, exactly the same size actually. It's a coincidence. But so we use actually also knowledge from one project to the other to improve our designs. But it creates really phenomenal views and light. And the building is actually going up and down with the river because it's a tidal river. We're quite close to the ocean. And every day it's going up and down 2 meters. And we use the roof. The roof is pitched because the roof is actually on the south. And that's the whole south part we use as solar panels. And the north part, we use it as a green roof. And the south part produces 140% of the energy we need. So the whole building is actually CO2 negative and energy positive, which is, I think, really amazing. And then we had the amazing honor, like last week, Monday, that the building was opened by Ban Ki-moon and the King of the Netherlands. And also they took this fantastic leader picture right in front of the floating office, which I've never ever experienced that actually. It was really phenomenal, super nice. And that project was actually not easy to build because we've never actually done a floating building before, and it was also very hard to find a contractor. And we found a very nice contractor to work with. Also actually the same contractor that also built Villa 1. And that led us to the idea to also found our own construction company. A construction company that will build actually according to more, let's say, the German model, where you basically as an architect you define all the elements that you want to have in your building and you control the quality of each of the suppliers. So that's the company we founded now a short while ago, and that's how we're now going to build most of our buildings. I wanted to end very quickly with this project, the Ginocular Tower. We designed it together with IND. It's a project in Ginocular. It was a competition in 2012. Ginocular is actually the place where the Turks beat the British and gained their independence. And right on these hills, this is actually a painting that is in the mayor's office of Ginocular. And you see here the Battle of Ginocular, where the Turks are beating the British Navy. And then ever since the British Navy left the waters of Turkey. On these hills, the competition was to design an antenna tower. And we were in a very large international competition. We won that competition. During the competition, we worked on a lot of different ideas. We were always thinking about the silhouette of the tower. But then again, we couldn't agree on it because we were also with a lot of architects on the project. We were together with IND architects. We had a very large team of designers. And what we did at some point is we went back to the brief and we actually found out that in the middle of the site there's actually a hole. And it says in the hole of the site, it says military area, you cannot build there. What we also found out is actually the antenna itself is actually so incredibly strong that you cannot build anything next to it where people can be. So you have to be at least 100 meters away from the antenna. And that's when we entirely changed strategy. This was 1 week before the deadline. And we created actually a project where we said, okay, let's build the antenna over here. And then let's build the visitor center as far away as we can from the antenna over there. And let's create a loop in between that actually connects the antenna to the visitor center. This is basically the first sketches we made on that. And that's how we actually then presented the project. We presented the project as a big painting. And you can imagine, you can still remember that I told you that in the mayor's office there was also a big painting. So we thought it would be really good to somehow connect to that painting. So we made this beautiful painting with Mir from Norway. And that's how the shape turned out. That's how the renders are entirely made in steel, because there's a boat industry very close by. And it was interesting that we had to, after winning the competition, we had 6 months to do all the detailing, We did that, we finished all the detailing, we made all the drawings, and then we didn't hear anything for 4 years. And then all of a sudden, they were already building without even telling us. And they had already started. That was extremely weird. But yeah, so they almost finished it. They're still demolishing the old antenna towers. But it's almost entirely done. So these are from about 4 months ago. And you can see it's almost there. You can see the shape of the tower rising. Entirely done in Corten steel. Yeah, it's an extremely exciting project for us, also because it's such a free gesture, and it's of course also a large project in Turkey. It was one of the first and also one of the last big international competitions organized by the Turkish government. And I guess it shows you that architecture is always slow, but it's also in a certain way about persistence. I wanted to end with this image. It's basically Ginocular is not only the site where the Turks beat the English. It's also the place where it's very close to Troy, and this is actually the horse from Troy, from the movie Troy, that is actually in Ginocular, the Trojan horse. And I basically wanted to end with this image because, in a way, for me, architecture is basically a Trojan horse. You know, as an architect, I think you are always trying to make Trojan horses. You're trying to create a strategy in which you can complete the vision and create a better future for the people, you know, in society and the clients that are asking you to design for them. I wanted to thank you very much. I'm really curious if there's any questions. Thank you.